This is John Freeman. I'm the Executive Director of GLREA. I want to welcome everybody to this evening's Michigan Solar Story. We have a great program tonight. We have Frank Krawczel from the AES Corporation. This is a developer of large-scale solar, and they are members of GLREA, and they've been very good members the last few years, and we're very glad to help them. We do these solar stories or clean energy seminars every Thursday evening. We have a series of sponsors. This evening, our sponsor is the Michigan Department of Environmental, Great Lakes and Energy, otherwise known as EGLE. And then we have, of course, McNaughton and McKay, a big provider of solar panels and racking and inverters for solar companies throughout Michigan. We have Iron Ridge Racking, and then we also have Harvest Solar, as well as Homeland Solar. So thank you very much to our sponsors. And Frank is going to talk about a wonderful project. It's called the Thorn Lake Solar Project. It's located in Manchester Township, which is within Washtenaw County. So as per usual, Frank's going to give a presentation, and then we'll open up for questions from everybody. So Frank, take it away. And if you want to load up your PowerPoint, or that's great. So
sure. Yeah, thanks, John. And thank you all for having me here. Did I share the right screen? Everything looks okay?
Looks great.
Okay. Let me get my presentation side on my end. Yeah, so yeah, thanks again for having me. I think this is the second or third time I've come and presented to this group. So Thorn Lake Solar is actually the fourth of a portfolio of 4 projects that we have been developing in Michigan. So we're really excited. You know, the other 3 are in construction now. Primarily have started their civil work. You know, there's some fence up. I think in one project farther out to the west, we have some piles on the ground. But yeah, really, you know, dipping our toes into construction in Michigan. And I myself have been developing in Michigan for the past 3 years. And, you know, we really enjoy working in the state and feel that we've been successful in the States. So, you know, we're continuing to grow that portfolio in Michigan. Thorn Lake Solar won't be the last project to keep us around. So just for, you know, a quick idea for what I'll discuss here. I'll just cover AES. You know, when I first came and spoke with you all, I was working for S-Power. We went through a merger with AES Distributed Energy to form AES Clean Energy, and that's who we are now. We're part of the larger umbrella company called AES, which is a Fortune 500 company. But we, AES Clean Energy, focus specifically on renewable energy development in the United States. So after, you know, about AES, I'll give you some project overviews. This is a little bit false. I'm not going to show you visual simulations, or at least that's not my intent today, just because I have them available, but we're actually revamping them and redoing them. There were just some things that we wanted to make some changes to. And then we'll talk about economic impacts, and then talk about the community engagement, you know, the efforts that we've done so far. And then, you know, we're always ears open. So if you all have suggestions on ways that we can support the local community, we definitely want to be focused on Manchester Township specifically. But, you know, we'd love to hear any suggestions. So about AES, again, I mentioned that we're a Fortune 500 company. You know, the company has expanded and grown tremendously, especially over the past you know, couple of years with us more involved. We have, you know, over 8,000 employees. I probably interact with about 500 of them, and then, you know, I have a much smaller team that focuses on Michigan with me, of about 8 people. So we're connected to this larger company, but still we're regionalized to a sense that I'm focused on Michigan development, and you know, that's one of my core responsibilities. In terms of our development portfolio, we have 51 gigawatts. We actually recently acquired community energy as well, so that expanded our portfolio. And then we're operating 4.6 gigawatts across the country. And then we're either have projects in construction or actively have them contracted with off-takers. That portfolio is about 5.6 gigawatts. So, really impressive. And, those numbers are the numbers of, one of the largest renewable energy developers in the country. So we're happy to, be at the scale, but also happy to be able to come and talk to local groups and, show our support and, focus on these individual projects that we have in certain townships. So Thorn Lake Solar, it's in Manchester Township in Washtenaw County, as you all know. It's a 20 megawatt project on 159 acres. Relatively medium-sized project. The other three projects were also in this range of 20 megawatts, roughly around the 120 to 200 acre range. In terms of project development and timing, we have submitted a CUP application, so a conditional use permit application, and we're expecting to have the public hearing April 21st. We've at least requested that special meeting for that date, and we expect to start construction in the fall of 2023. Then we'll be complete by late 2024. Our PPA that we have contracted with Consumers Energy is just to correct myself, I think I said consumers, or we acquired community energy, and we have offtake with the utility in Michigan, Consumers Energy. I tend to confuse those two names since they're so close, but just wanted to make that clarification. Anyways, we have a PPA with Consumers Energy, and the PPA begins September 15th, 2024. So that's when we will be plugged into the grid and generating power. Okay, in terms of clean energy, this project will be producing 39,500 megawatt hours a year. So that's equal to 28,000 tons of CO2 and can power up to 3,500 homes annually. That is looking at the electric and gas use of a home. If you look at just the electric use of a home, that number does get higher. And then it's equal to about 6,100 cars driven for 1 year, and then equal to the carbon sequestration of 33,000 acres of forest in 1 year. So, we develop all scales of projects across the country. I think it is impressive the impact that you do have with, just a 20 megawatt plant here and what those numbers equal out to. A little bit more on project details. So, it's going to be a solar plant. So we're going to be using photovoltaics. It's going to be pole mounted and on a single axis tracker. So we'll have rows that are oriented north-south, and they will rotate following the sun throughout the day. The piles themselves, we've done a geotechnical study on this site. Fortunately, we haven't found any severe issues to where we would need any concrete foundations. So we should be able to drive these piles just straight into the ground. Shouldn't be a problem. In terms of panel height, this has actually been a conversation with the township. We're doing things a little bit different here. All of us in some way have been affected and impacted by supply chain issues. And really, by having this higher height, typically we've told communities that we're looking at 5 to 8 feet in height for a panel. This 16 feet in height panel is assuming that we're using a 2 portrait height panel. So for these photos, you see 1 portrait, and we actually had a decent photo in the beginning here. Over here, bottom left-hand corner, that's a 2 portrait height racking system. So you can see that those modules are much higher and make those folks look like shrimps in that photo. So, this is just something different for this case, and really it's because we need to keep our options open in terms of procurement, just because there's a little bit of just uncertainty right now in the market. specific to what we're able to procure in at the given time that we need to get, piles and everything sent. Okay. Beyond that, the project will be set back a minimum of 50 feet from the property line. In a lot of cases, it's set back upwards of, I think, 250 feet, just because we weren't able to fit panels in between a road and a distribution line. So we just went ahead and set back everything. So that will significantly reduce the visual impact. And then areas, which I'll get into on the next slide, or 2 slides from now, I believe, I'll give you a sense for how we are visually screening it with vegetation as well. In terms of the perimeter fence, it's going to be 7 feet total, 6 feet chain length, 1 feet of barbed wire. That'll be 3 strands of barbed wire facing outward. That's pretty standard for a site like this where we need to deal with NERC compliance. Now, beyond that, we have overhead distribution poles that will connect the solar array to the grid. Consumers Energy actually builds that power line. So, we're focused primarily on the PV and getting our substation. And then we have a point of change of ownership with Consumers Energy, and they take over that gen tie is what we call that, that connects us to the grid. Now, in terms of site conditions, this site is really agricultural and open, fairly buildable. You can see here a general layout that we have, especially this northern portion. There aren't many gaps where we need to cut out for topography, for slopes that really would require significant grading. Wetlands are to a minimum, especially in the northern portion. You can see here in the southern portion, especially around this wetland, that's an unregulated wetland, but just because of the soil moisture, we've chosen not to build in that. There's also a little bit more topography around that wetland where it's really dipping down for that catchment. I actually had, as a side note, preliminary conversations with Ducks Unlimited about how we could, enhance that wetland and create more of like a migratory stopping point for birds heading down. And we've kind of gone back and forth, and would like to see, something along those lines shape up. But I have to be careful with what I sign our operations team, construction team up for. So walking the fine line there. Now, while we're operating, as I kind of mentioned here, we're not going to be impacting wetlands, especially regulated ones. The one regulated wetland on the site is in the forest here, in that southeastern corner. The plan is to not really touch these trees. We may have some clearing around the edge here, where we need to mitigate some for shading, just because those are incredibly tall trees. They're also on a hill, so just a little bit of mitigation so we can get our production up, but not too much, because it really is a valuable resource there to keep those trees in place. And we have to deal with threatened and endangered species and making sure that we're following all protocols there. Cultural resources won't be impacted either. And then in terms of air quality, we really do make our best effort to reduce construction dust while we're on site, and then later while we're in operations. Traffic in and out of the site is really minimal. You're not going to have an annual planting or an annual harvest where you have tractors kicking up dust and whatnot. Everything will really stabilize over the 35 years that we're operating. Now, last point here, the residents' daily lives. I just like to add that, stating that really the focus here is that this project is not going to be a loud neighbor. It's really not going to change or impact folks who are living around this site. For the most part, it's going to be quiet, and it's not going to disrupt the local community. Okay. For some reason that skipped. Sorry. I don't know what happened to my PowerPoint here. Two seconds, please.
No worries.
Okay. Okay. Actually, I don't know I'm having I'll just share like this. Okay, so economic impact and operations. So the nice thing about this site is that, well, the common thing that we run into is that we're the largest taxpayer in the communities that we work in. We've now worked in, for Letts Creek, we're in Grass Lake Charter Township. For Cement City, we're in Columbia Township. And then for Pullman, we're in Allegan County in Lee Township. And for a lot of those places, working, generally in solar farms, rural areas. So with that, you're not seeing, large industrial plants or whatnot that are competing with the type of tax revenue and injection that we have with our project. So during construction, we expect to have 200 to 250 folks building the site. And then during operations, we expect 4 people to operate it. So that really strengthens the point that this is a quiet neighbor, really not too much traffic. Those 4 people that will be operating it will be distributed across the 4 projects that we have or will be operating at that time across Michigan. So it'll be really a part-time presence. Now, in terms of local tax revenue, again, going back to that fairly massive injection of capital, this project is roughly around $25 to $30 million. And with that, we are reassessed, reevaluated on real estate and personal property tax. So if the land continued to stay in its current use, we would expect it to generate $400,000 over 35 years. Whereas with our plan, we expect to generate $5 million in tax revenues. Now, in terms of operations, again, we have that 4-person crew operating at part-time. The plant will be operating 24/7. And with that, we'll have a SCADA, which essentially is telemetry that monitors the system at all times. It will send us a signal if there are any issues, any failures, and we're able to dispatch crews and get someone on site to diagnose and actually troubleshoot the issue. Sometimes we can diagnose and troubleshoot issues remotely as well. In terms of maintenance, we'll have people there, typically mowing grass and whatnot beyond, the electrical components, and, just keeping it up to snuff, and, just a well-maintained site, looking good for the neighbors. A lot of folks ask about sheep. We do use sheep. We actually use sheep on probably about 1/3 to half of our operating portfolio now. In a lot of places, it just depends on, the certain situation and circumstance, if, it makes sense for that project. Now, in terms of security, I mentioned earlier, we have a perimeter fence. We also have a project substation. That is where we get more closer to NERC compliance. So we'll have an 8-foot tall chain link fence around that substation, in addition to that perimeter fence. So it's double duty to prevent any issues there. Now, in terms of community engagement, I think John, is well aware of, our efforts that we try to do. We try to connect with the communities that we're working in. So what we've done so far in Manchester Township is, we have been a member of the Manchester and Brooklyn Irish Hills Chamber of Commerce. The Brooklyn Irish Hills, I don't know if there's any any members or any folks part of that chamber here on this call, but they are incredible. They've led us to a lot of opportunities to support the communities that we're working in. They have some oversight in Manchester. They've been excellent in Columbia Township as well. We were also the chicken broil sponsors. I can't remember if we're the headliner or just under the headliner. We'll also be doing the same this upcoming year. And then we donated $5,000 to the Brooklyn Manchester Trail feasibility study. That's that trail that's being worked on by the Department of Natural Resources, excuse me. So overall, we really try to engage again, try to have these partnerships, these sponsorships, try to have presentations like this to really make the community aware of what we're doing and the efforts that we're trying to do as well. So please let us know if you do have suggestions. Here's my contact information. So Frank Krawczel at AES.com. And, we're also collecting letters of support. So if you would like to learn more about this project, send in a letter of support. We would greatly appreciate that. Again, we're looking at a public hearing here in a month with the township. So hope that that everything goes well there, and then we can build this fourth project in Michigan. So thank you all. And we'll take questions now.
That sounds great, Frank. Thank you so much. Great presentation. And it's really encouraging to see how much your company places upon being a good community partner. You're going to be there for 35 years, so it makes all the smart sense in the world. And obviously, the more that companies like yours has a reputation for being open and wanting to be a good, community partner, that helps, promote solar, throughout the state and frankly throughout the country. Before we begin, there was one question on chat from Elaine. And Elaine was asking, rather than having grass and mowing, have you thought about, maybe doing some native plants? And there's a lot of discussion. I think I had Charles Gould talk to you from Michigan State Extension Service about, native plants and all that. So what is your response to Elaine and everybody else?
Yeah, no, that's certainly an interest of ours. I know for the other projects that we're working on in Michigan, Cement City, it actually has a specific pollinator program. That project was in MDARD or through PA 116 land. So it had a very specific pollinator plan. For another project, we did a native mix of pollinators, and it was also kind of oriented towards sheep grazing. So it would be best for that in the future. And for this project, that's something that we typically make that decision a little bit farther down the road as to like a specific seed mix that we would do. But, we do have a track record present where we're already doing that. So I would expect the same for this.
Okay. Sounds great. We have a couple other questions on the chat, but I would just assume have the person ask the question out loud. So Dale, and I know Dale's not bashful about asking questions. So Dale, why don't you ask Frank your question that you posted on the chat?
Frank, thanks for your presentation. It was really great. Would you be able to talk about, even in general terms, what does a PPA look like for a project like this? Like, is the outflow or the compensation for electricity fixed over time, and it's like this much for the whole project for 35 years, or is it something that changes over time on a daily or a yearly basis?
Yeah, so we have the revenues all set for the next 20 years. So this contract is actually for 20 years. And after that 20-year mark, essentially we have this project in place. It makes sense for us to just go merchant and sell the electricity generated on a merchant basis, just because that makes more sense than decommissioning it at that point, because there's still life in that project. These PPAs specifically, we have an energy component and we have a capacity component. The energy component is escalating over time to match essentially what future rates would look like. And then the capacity is a set zonal resource credit cost. And our assumption is that that value will actually decrease over time, because what happens is, and this happened in CAISO, we get paid for the capacity that we are generating in the months of June, July, and August in the hours of 15 through 17. And that's at least the standard right now. And as you have more solar generated, that window seems to shift, and that did happen in CAISO. So we assume that that window will shift into a non-peak solar hour. So we have a fairly heavy haircut as time goes on that capacity revenue for that, because solar is certainly not going away, and it's filling up the queue. It's the most prominent in terms of megawatts in the queue and what we're going to build in the future compared to other resources. So
do you think at some point adding batteries or storage would improve, like be able to let you sell power, even if you shifted an hour or two, you might be able to still supply capacity?
Yeah. And for this project specifically, I don't think that we would, we might look at it, in year 21, but we also develop standalone storage and battery that's, part of a solar plant. So, it's something that we're doing now. It's not as common in MISO, which Michigan is part of. It's the Midwest, kind of starting from Michigan and then over to Wisconsin, Minnesota, and heading south all the way down to Louisiana. You're not seeing too many standalone storage projects yet, but give it a couple years and it's going to be fairly common. And we're actually starting our first standalone battery storage project in Indiana. We're starting to develop that.
In a related question, John Richter has a related question regarding the contract and the relationship with consumers. So John, why don't you pose your question?
Yeah, so I know consumers has been getting solar installations in different ways. So I'm curious if you're under PURPA, right, as a qualified facility, or was this part of their competitive solicitation, or is it part of their voluntary green power, large customer program, or can you answer that?
Yeah, it was part of PURPA. All this is public information. There was a settlement agreement with SEIA, the large national organization that represents, the solar industry. And we were able to get these PPAs through that. And this project Thorn Lake is actually part of, we were signing the PPA for this project at the same time as the other 3 projects that are currently in construction. The only difference, which is surprisingly, we were able to make it work, but this project just has a longer gen tie. So the lead time to build that gen tie back to the substation that Consumers Energy has to do caused the project to be delayed into 2023 and 2024, versus the other projects are finishing construction later this year.
Okay, yeah, I'm familiar with that settlement agreement. And just as a second question, do you know the DC to AC capacity ratio on this?
Yeah, we generally design a 1.3. I'm assuming you're asking about the inverter load ratio. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay,
Yep.
Let's go back now to Doug, who had a question on chat, but I want to make sure Doug can ask it verbally. That's more fun. Everyone can hear it. So go ahead,
Sure.
Doug, and then we'll call upon Lee next.
Okay, great. Thanks, Frank. Thanks for your presentation. It was great. You identified presentations like this as a way of engaging the community, and I wonder, have you presented like this in the community already? And I'm wondering about the community response.
Yeah, so this project, first off, yes, we have. I probably gave a first presentation about a year and a half ago, year and a quarter ago, and then we did another presentation probably about 6 months ago, 4 months ago, in that range. So we presented twice now. We've sent out I sent out myself personal letters to all our neighbors, and that letter notice actually provided the most feedback. I was actually surprised, with the other 3 projects, we've gotten one or two people, but for this area, we do have some more single family parcels in the area. We have some folks that are, really interested in this project and just making sure that's not going to affect them, and, the standard things that, folks worry about with property values and whatnot, which, we have studies, showing that solar farms don't impact property values. So, we've been working through those questions and been having those conversations for, upward for a few months now. So.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Lee, go ahead, Lee. Can't hear you, Lee. You're on mute.
In community outreach, wasn't it your company that had a presentation at Columbia High School over 2 years ago?
Yeah, I was there. That was me.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's the first time I met you. And I want to compliment you on, I've been to other kinds of open houses, and with other companies. That was very straightforward, and people you had there supporting you were very helpful. So yeah, you started this quite a while ago.
Yeah.
The other question that I have, you said the rates would change some and the time of day remediate stuff could change at the 20-year mark. If you decided to put in a battery, would that be your company's decision, or would you have to go through the utility to be able to optimize your time of day delivery?
So I guess the logistics for us having a battery component, that battery would be considered a separate project. And it would have to go through the standard MISO process through
Okay.
that. And
I thought it might be like that.
yeah, and that's
so-
taken about 5 years now.
Yeah. So I recently came across a thing called SoulSmart. It's a branch of the USDA, and they offer guidance for communities to get their solar installations to be as practical for their location as possible. Have you ever worked with them?
We haven't. Is it mainly for behind the meter projects?
No, it's for large units, and there's 3 of them in Michigan currently. But when you look at a map of the places where they've influenced installations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, though, you can hardly tell what the state is because there's so many balloons showing that this has been a way to interface agriculture with good water flow and soil health things related to solar. So, okay, I'll continue to look at it, but you're not going to answer my question because you haven't done it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks for the suggestion as well.
I'll send it to you.
Yeah, thank you.
John Gurney?
Yeah, thanks, John. I'm wondering about the displaced agriculture production on this site. You said that it was agricultural. Are you buying the land or are you leasing it? And whichever it is, how does the original farming landowner compare with the revenue from the solar versus the revenue from the agriculture? Do you know?
So first question, we're leasing this property, and in our lease, we have provisions to where we have to decommission the site, have to restore it to its original state. So that's specifically in our lease, and we're obligated to do that for the landowner. In terms of revenues, we're doing business all across the country, and we're definitely seeing I guess corn prices shifting dramatically. So with that, we've seen quite a bit more folks that own farm fields make it a little bit more difficult for us to do business with, because the price is definitely getting up there because that value to have farmland is it's been high the past year or so.
Yeah, I'm asking because there's a farmer friend of mine just a half mile down the road who has been approached by DTE numerous times to take over a big chunk of his farmland and put a solar farm on it. And so far he's resisted, partly because financially he's not sure that it's really going to work out, and also because kind of a moral issue that he feels like using good agricultural land to grow crops, to grow food, is maybe a better use, and the solar farms ought to be on marginal land. And that's why I was asking about this particular piece of land. Do you know what kind of agriculture was done there and whether it was very productive or not?
Yeah, it was beans and corn. For this certain situation, this solar farm is the highest and best use. That's why it's being built. It makes the most economic sense in terms of output and value for the farmer, and then also for us as the developer, selling power to our off-taker. So and that's really where it's just, it depends on the specific situation. One thing that we're able to offer are revenues that you can project out, 20, 35 years from now, versus having to follow the value of corn or soybeans. In terms of using farmland, for food or whatnot, it's really just an individual choice in how that individual chooses to use their personal property. It's personal property rights, right? So, it's not me. For me, it's the only thing I can offer is, a lease option or a purchase option and the terms prescribed in there. But it's not my decision to make in terms of morality, and yeah.
And it sounds as though that after the 20 years or 35 years or whatever, that once you remove the solar system and you restore the land to how it was before, that they could conceivably start growing crops again, right?
Yeah, in our Letts Creek project, Grass Lake Charter Township, that is actually a centennial farm that's been with that family, over 100 years. So they were very adamant about having a lease, having those terms clearly stated about how we're restoring the land to its original state, so then they can go back to farming after our term when their kids want to use it.
So how do you find land to develop a large-scale project like this? I mean, I'm just fascinated by the process that your company goes through. And this is also helpful to me because occasionally I will get an email from somebody saying, hey, I got some property. Can you link me up with a developer? And, so I'm just curious, what is the process?
Yeah, so we actually have a completely separate team, probably about 20 people that work specifically on identifying markets that we want to work in. Michigan has been identified as a priority market for us. So they start at that high level and then narrow it all the way down to specific locations. Is there available capacity at this certain POI, whether it's a transmission line or a substation itself? So we'll do an injection analysis at a certain location, understand exactly what size project you can have there. And that ties into what available grid infrastructure you have. That's probably one of the most important aspects of a project, is just having, especially at the scale that we're operating or building at, having high voltage grid capacity right there. And then the next step from there is buildability, just making sure there's actually buildable land close to that specific point of interconnection. And surprisingly, there's a lot of areas that are not buildable. So, that gets back to, some of the opposition members that we deal with are worried about every single acre of farmland turning into solar farms. I actually deal with it in my personal life with my fiance's family is, owns farmland and, worried about that. But we, talk through those conversations about, there are so many other parameters beyond just having a plot of land to make a project actually happen. And it's not just having a farm field. So
sounds good. We got more questions. Let me go to Janice next.
Okay, thank you, Frank, for your presentation. I was curious when you mentioned sheep. I was wondering how that works. Is it the farmer that owns and maintains the sheep, or is it your company? And are there other animals or anything else that the land can be used for while it's being used for solar?
Yeah, so sheep are the main type of animal. Goats like to chew wires and jump on panels. Cows like to scratch themselves on piles and panels. So they
But
can
wait a
be,
minute, they're 16 feet tall though, right?
well, we still design to a panel height when they're at full tilt, 3 feet from the ground. So
Okay.
yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So yeah, the other two options are fairly destructive. You know, yeah, sheep is the main conversation. In terms of our company, we will subcontract that out for the most part. It's something that happens later in the operations phase because we've actually gone through some growing pains of implementing sheep too early before we have our vegetation fully established. So you really do need 2 to 3 years of a project operating and the grass really establishing its roots before you can get sheep on there, because they will eat it all the way down to pretty much to the roots. So, you know, beyond the stabilization, you really have to be moving the sheep across the site fairly regularly, so they aren't, you know, overeating.
Sounds great. Is that it, Janice? Okay, Clyde Taylor.
That's it. Thank you.
You're welcome, Clyde. Go ahead, Clyde.
My upload speed is usually pretty bad and folks can't hear me. Can you hear me tonight?
Yeah, we can hear you, Clyde. You're doing great. Go ahead.
Okay, good, good. Frank, when we talked a year or so ago, you were looking for a 100 megawatt project with Detroit Edison. Did anything come of that?
Not that I'm aware of. We have beyond this portfolio, there's a larger project actually. I think it's about, I actually barely started working on it, but it's farther west. I think in the Holland area, it's close to 200 megawatts. But so in a few years, I'll come back and present that project to you all.
Terrific.
That's really the main thing we have in the works.
One other question. The Cement City project, is that east or west of 127?
It is east, I believe.
That's a half mile east of 127 on White Road.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks,
Yeah,
Lee.
I've handed that project off to a project manager, so I haven't had to think about it for a few months.
Well, like I said, we got some sharp people here and they're interested in all things solar. So Lee was helping us out. Let's go back to John Richter, then we'll go back to Lee. John Richter, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to the PPA agreement you got through PURPA. That was the result of a settlement because of complaints against consumers about, I don't know, delays and things that were making it difficult for PURPA installers to get things done. How have things been since that settlement? Are the utilities, and I would say, you know, the two big Michigan utilities, treating developers properly, or is that still an ongoing battle and you're getting held off?
Yeah, I honestly can't really speak too much to that, and not because I'm withholding information. I just honestly don't know the answer. I can say from our personal experience, I personally had concerns with, just how welcomed we would be. And I really have to say, over the years, we really established a relationship, built rapport, and really feel good about our counterparty over there and working with them, and being open with the issues that we deal with on a regular basis, and just in terms of solar development and being able to communicate that to them. And not having them set up roadblocks just because they can. So yeah, I really feel good about the team that we're working with over there.
Thank you.
Let me ask a follow-up question. All your projects have been working with consumers. Is that by design or is that coincidental, or you have just found that working with consumers is just, I'm not trying to load the question, easier than working with DTE, or is it just the way it's worked out so far?
Yeah, it's just the way that it's worked out so far with PPAs that we have, and through that settlement agreement that was with Consumers Energy specifically. So yeah, I think DTE has had RFPs, but yeah, we just, because of the settlement, we've worked with consumers, and that these 4 projects are the main ones that we have right now in this mature state. I think in the future, as we get some of these other, this main project a little bit more mature, we'll probably be looking to other off takers, and we'll have to establish a relationship there.
Sounds good. Back to you, Lee.
Yeah, Frank was very courteous when he talked about rents. I'm a retired farmer and a member of the Farm Bureau, so I appreciate him commenting on property rights. That's one of the things that we have to remind people of in this country. But my experience is that the lease rates are commonly, if you have very good farmland, the lease rate might be twice what you could get by renting it to a neighbor who's a farmer. And in land that's a little less productive, the lease rate to a solar company might be 3 or 4 times what the going cash rent would be. And my comment continues to talk about the use of land for food. We should stop burning corn ethanol in our cars if we care about food production as a limiting part of our society. So, and to Janice, who asked about other practices with solar, you should Google agrivoltaics. There's a big movement to use the space in between panels to grow vegetables and watermelons and pumpkins and things like that. In fact, I know there's a group working with the conservation district to try to get a grant together to do exactly that in an area that grows a lot of watermelons. So
Thank you. Thanks, Lee. So I want to ask another question of Frank, and I just want to take a step back. And you work in Michigan, you work in Indiana, and it sounds like you work in other states, and your company, it sounds like it works all over the country. So how do you view the solar market in the United States? Is it really booming? Are things really picking up? I mean, have you seen like a sea change in attitude towards transitioning to renewables from fossil fuels? And does the future look bright from your point of view? And I mean, what is your view of the current solar market and how you see the future and how it's unfolding?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to answer your question is if you look at the queues of, MISO, PJM, which is that Virginia, Pennsylvania, Jersey market, in Maryland, CAISO, which is covering California, WEC, all of these areas are backed up in terms of their studies. And that's because they have been seeing an unprecedented amount of projects filed in their territories. So MISO specifically, we have filed projects in 2020 and we still have not received our first study back on interconnection. Typically is, a 6-month turnaround. It's been over a year now. And that's because there's so many solar projects in the queue right now. And it's primarily solar projects. There's some battery storage as well. There's definitely some wind projects, but the majority of the projects there are solar, and that's across the country. PJM actually has a formal 2-year delay on their queue. CAISO also, I think, set a formal delay for a year. WEC is handled more on a utility to utility, which is kind of covering that Utah, New Mexico, Arizona area. And then up to the Pacific Northwest, that's handled on kind of a utility basis. But yeah, they're every single person or entity out there is backed up.
So that's a good problem. Well, it's a difficult problem to have if you're in the business, but it's encouraging to see that there's no end to sight, and the transitioning to renewable energy looks as though it's going full force, and we should take a lot of pride in the sense that we're contributing to this transition. So that sounds great. Okay, we have a couple more minutes. I have another question from Dale, and then we'll wrap it up. Go ahead, Dale.
So what you just talked about with the queue for projects across the country, to me, it sounds like, are the utilities not really just delaying implementation of all these projects so that they can do their own? I mean, the queues that you talk about is for developers to do projects. The utilities probably don't suffer from the same, hey, let's wait a year before I can do something. And I wonder if really that's a good thing. I wonder if that's a delay tactic across the board. Granted, yes, there's more and more solar projects being proposed, but.
Yeah, so at least we're touching on the extent of my knowledge, but I am working on a project where we're looking at transmission rights, and it's my understanding that the only way that you cannot avoid the standard, MISO study cycle is if you are decommissioning, say, a coal plant, and you have 200, 400 megawatts that are available, and you can have a build on transfer or something project that fills up that capacity. But point being, you're still decommissioning some likely traditional source of fuel to free up those capacity rights for another project to come in. So that is one way that they can avoid the queue. And then I think beyond that, I think they have to go through the standard process. And the reason it's backed up is because when you have so many different projects triggering upgrades, you kind of have not all these projects are going to happen, but if they were to happen, you have you trigger like a grid failure. So it's where you're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars that need to be upgraded to get us to the point. And it's difficult to understand exactly which developer, which project has to pay for that. So.
Okay, thanks.
I'm optimistic, but yeah, it's still it's a very frustrating thing to see delays every single month.
Yes. Clyde, you probably have the final question, Clyde. Go ahead.
Is there anything in your lease agreement regarding carbon credits?
No, that's not something that we traditionally, discuss in our leases.
Okay, thank you.
Any other final questions for Frank? Okay, well, I just want
I've got one more, John.
Go ahead, Clyde.
In regard to the setback agreement, would there be a problem if somebody put a residential solar array in that setback area?
Yeah, so residential projects are subject to different standards. Manchester Township specifically, they have in their ordinance, they have utility scale I lost words, but parameters, and they have a separate section for residential scale or commercial scale. That would be much smaller. Typically, they aren't subject to the same type of setbacks that we are.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds good. Well, before we wrap up, I do want to recognize Brianna. Brianna is a colleague of Frank, and I had a pleasure of meeting her several weeks ago. So I just want to welcome her to GLREA as well, and hopefully when she comes into Michigan, we'll get a chance to sit down and visit and everything. So I want to thank Frank Krawczel from AES for coming tonight and sharing this very exciting proposal and being completely upfront about the business, his business, and how they develop and install and deal with all the different components of installing a large-scale solar system. So thank you very much. And again, I want to thank Frank also for for being a great member of GLREA and being a sponsor of our events over the last few years. And we look forward to partnering with you down the road as well. So with that, I want to thank everybody else for joining us this evening and look forward to our next solar story down the road, and look for my emails on terms of who will be presenting. So with that, I'm going to stop the recording and thank everybody.